Son visits mom's grave 10 years after her death. Suddenly he feels a tap on his shoulder. After 10 long years since his mother's passing, a son visits her grave, only to be startled by an unexpected tap on his shoulder that sends shivers down his spine. The late summer heat seeped through the car windows, adding to Darren Gavves' growing irritation after a long day at work. At 33, he felt trapped in the familiar frustration of evening traffic, his fingers drumming an impatient rhythm on the steering wheel of his modest sedan. The persistent buzz of his phone cut through the monotonous hum of idling engines, the fourth call this month from his brother, Micah. With a resigned sigh, Darren connected the call through his car's Bluetooth system. Micah's voice filled the confined space, laced with a practiced mix of guilt and entitlement. "Darren, come on, man, you've got to help me out here," Micah began, his tone already grating on Darren's nerve. "You've got a stable job and no family to support. What's a little cash between brothers?" Darren's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles whitening as he fought to maintain his composure. "Micah, we've been through this. I've got my own expenses, house maintenance, Dad's medical bills. I just can't or won't." Micah interrupted, his voice gaining a cruel edge. "Always the responsible one, huh? Funny how that didn't matter when Mom's inheritance was being divided up." The words hung in the air, a bitter reminder of the deep-seated resentment that had plagued their relationship for years. Taking a deep breath, Darren forced his voice to remain steady. "That's not fair, and you know it. I can't give you money I don't have." "Whatever," Micah spat. "Just remember who your real family is next time you're feeling all high and mighty." The call ended with a string of curses, leaving Darren's ears ringing. Alone in the car once more, he allowed his frustration to surface. His palms slammed against the steering wheel, the sharp pain a welcome distraction from the memories threatening to overwhelm him. Being the adopted child in a family of biological siblings had never been easy, but moments like this made the divide feel insurmountable. By the time Darren finally pulled into his driveway, the sun had long since set. The porch light illuminated his father, Henry, waiting impatiently in his wheelchair. Even from a distance, Darren could see the familiar twist of displeasure on the older man's face. "About time you showed up," Henry grumbled as Darren approached. "Been sitting here waiting for dinner like some kind of invalid." Biting back a retort, Darren reminded himself that, technically, his father was an invalid. "Sorry, Dad. Traffic was a nightmare. I'll get dinner started right away." Henry waved off the explanation with a dismissive hand. "Excuses, excuses. Your brother Micah managed to visit earlier without any problems." The casual mention of Micah sent a chill through Darren. Quickening his pace, he guided his father's wheelchair into the house with practiced ease. The interior carried a heavy atmosphere of neglect, not from a lack of care but from the weight of 10 years without his mother's presence. Moving through his caretaking duties with the efficiency born of long practice, Darren wheeled Henry to the table, prepared a simple dinner, and turned on the TV to his father's preferred news channel. But tonight, the routine felt especially hollow, Micah's earlier confrontation still echoing in his mind. As Henry settled into his usual spot at the dining table, Darren excused himself, claiming he needed to change out of his work clothes. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, he was propelled by a growing sense of unease. Swinging his bedroom door open, Darren was greeted by chaos. Drawers had been pulled out, their contents scattered across the floor. Clothes lay in haphazard piles, evidence of a frantic search. The sight was painfully familiar, a recurring violation whenever Darren refused his brother's demands for money. Heart racing, he dropped to his knees beside the bed, his trembling fingers prying up a loose floorboard. Relief washed over him as he saw the small metal box still nestled in its hiding place. Allowing himself a moment to breathe, he replaced the board and stood, surveying the damage to his room. The sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs shattered his momentary calm. Before he could react, Micah burst into the room, his face contorted with rage. "Where is it?" Micah snarled, his breath hot against Darren's face as he slammed him against the wall. "I know you've got cash stashed away, you selfish prick." For once, Darren didn't back down. Years of suppressed anger fueled his resistance as he shoved Micah back. "Get out of my room," he shouted, his voice hoarse from the pressure on his throat. The brothers clashed violently, the fight ugly and fueled by a lifetime of resentment. A lamp toppled, shattering against the hardwood floor. Darren's elbow caught Micah's jaw, while Micah's fist found Darren's ribs. "What the hell is going on up there?" Henry's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and accusatory. To Darren's dismay, the anger was directed solely at him. "Darren, what are you doing to your brother?" Distracted, Darren turned towards the door, a mistake. Micah's eyes lit up as they caught the glint of metal beneath the disturbed floorboard. With a triumphant cry, he lunged for the hiding spot, emerging with the small box of savings clutched in his hands. "I knew it!" Micah crowed, already prying open the lid. His eyes widened at the sight of the $2,500 Darren had painstakingly saved over 2 years. "Look at this. And you say you never have money?" Before Darren could react, Micah was halfway down the stairs. The front door slammed, followed by the screech of tires as Micah's car sped away. Exhausted, Darren slumped against the wall, the adrenaline from the fight giving way to bone-deep weariness. The faint squeak of his father's wheelchair broke through his haze, snapping him back to reality. Summoning what strength he had left, Darren descended the stairs. At the bottom, Henry sat waiting, his wheelchair positioned squarely beneath the staircase, blocking the way forward. His face was a mask of stern disapproval, his sharp eyes scanning Darren as if weighing every bruise and ragged breath. "I hope you're proud of yourself," Henry began, his words cutting deep. "Attacking your own brother like that? And hiding money from him? You know he's got a wife and kids to support? A real man would help his family without all this fuss." Darren's voice trembled, a mix of frustration and exhaustion. "Dad, Micah has the family restaurant. The one he got from Mom's inheritance. Why do we always ask for money from me? This is the 4th time this month." He gestured around the room, his voice rising with emotion. "I've spent my money on this house, on your care, and now what? He took my personal savings." Darren's fists clenched as he fought to keep his composure, the weariness in his posture betraying just how much the weight of it all had worn him down. Henry's expression remained stern as he waved a hand dismissively. "Micah must have needed it for something important," he replied matter-of-factly. "You know how hard running a restaurant can be. Maybe there's some emergency you don't know about." Darren's frustration deepened, but Henry continued, his tone growing sharper. "And don't start lecturing me about money. Your mother would have wanted us to support each other as a family, not keep score. If Micah needed help, it's your job as his elder brother to step up." The lecture blurred into a familiar refrain about family responsibility and Darren's supposed selfishness. Too drained to argue, he let the words wash over him. Silently, he busied himself restoring order to the house, clearing the dining table, washing dishes, and loading them into the dishwasher. His movements were automatic, almost robotic. In the living room, his father called out, "Help me to bed." Darren obliged, steadying the wheelchair and guiding Henry through his nightly routine with practiced care. Once his father was settled, Darren dimmed the lights. "Good night, Dad," he whispered, retreating upstairs to his own room. Exhaustion pressed heavily on him as he shut the door behind him. Undressing, he changed into pajamas and flopped onto the bed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Only then did he reach for his phone, a habit that had become second nature. The screen lit up with dozens of unread messages. Midnight had passed, marking his birthday, but instead of heartfelt well wishes, the family group chat was abuzz with demands. Jaden had taken the lead, not to celebrate Darren, but to push for extravagant dinner plans. "Birthday boy, don't forget the family tradition," one message read. "You're treating us all to dinner. And none of that cafe nonsense like last year. We're talking a proper restaurant this time." Darren stared at the screen, disbelief and anger bubbling within him. Typing quickly, he responded, "Not celebrating this year. Sorry." The reply was instantaneous. Jaden insisted, his messages growing increasingly demanding. "It's tradition. Whoever's birthday it is treats the rest of the family. Don't be selfish." Frustration mounted. Darren closed the chat without responding. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, he made a decision. Tomorrow, at first light, he'd visit his mother's grave, the one place where he still felt a semblance of peace. Darren knelt at the gravestone, seeking peace, but his attention caught on an unexpected item lying against the weathered stone, a yoga headband. His heart skipped as recognition dawned. It was his mother's. Memories flooded back. Her gentle encouragement during morning yoga routines, teaching him to find stillness in a chaotic world. With trembling hands, Darren picked up the headband. The faded pattern, frayed edges, and even the juice stain he had accidentally left as a child were unmistakable. But how had it ended up here? Had one of his siblings visited? Why take the flowers he'd left earlier and leave this instead? And why today? Determined not to leave the grave bare, Darren headed to a nearby florist. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered, the scent of fresh blooms filling the air. "Can I help you?" the shopkeeper asked, her smile faltering at his distressed expression. "Yes, please," Darren said, trying to steady his voice. "I need a bouquet of purple and white orchids. Like these." He showed her a photo on his phone of the flowers he'd placed earlier. "They're beautiful," she replied, "but they're quite expensive, especially the purple variety." "That's fine," Darren said without hesitation. Back at the cemetery, Darren placed the new flowers carefully. Their vibrant petals stood out against the somber stone. Kneeling once more, he began to pray, focusing on his siblings, prayers for their return to righteousness and the teachings of their mother. But as he continued, painful memories surfaced. His brother's relentless bullying about his adoption, his father's subtle provocations, and the stolen allowances his mother had tried to give him. Lost in thought, Darren didn't notice the figure approaching from behind until a gentle tap on his shoulder startled him. Turning around, he froze. Standing before him, as real as the stone beside them, was his mother. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Is this a vision? Did God grant me this for my birthday?" Her face, older but unmistakable, softened into a smile. "Oh, Darren," she said gently, her voice achingly familiar. "This isn't a vision. I'm here. I'm alive." Darren shook his head, his mind reeling. "But you died. We buried you. I've been coming to this grave for years." "I know," she said, tears filling her eyes. "And I'm so sorry for everything. Here, touch my hand. Feel that I'm real." When Darren's trembling fingers touched hers, the truth crashed over him. A sob escaped him as tears flowed freely. "Mom, how? Why? I don't understand." She gently helped him to his feet. "I'll explain everything," she promised. "But not here. Let's go somewhere we can talk properly." Darren followed her to a nearby camper van. Inside, he was struck by the scent, a floral fragrance he remembered from his childhood. His eyes landed on the pot of orchids he'd placed earlier. "You took the flowers?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She nodded, smiling sheepishly. "I couldn't leave them behind when I knew I'd finally see you again." As they sat down, Darren finally found his voice. "Mom, we thought you died of cancer. There was a funeral. How is this possible?" Her expression turned serious. "It's a long story," she admitted. "But you deserve the truth." She explained how, fearing her cancer diagnosis and the impact on their toxic family, she had faked her death. With the help of a friend, she staged everything and disappeared to start a new life. "I know it was selfish," she said, her voice breaking. "I hurt you, and I'll regret that forever. But it felt like my only way to escape." Darren listened, torn between anger and relief. He asked about her life since, and she described a decade-long journey of healing and reinvention. From a secluded Himalayan town to remission and eventually back to the States, Carolyn shared how she'd found strength in yoga, meditation, and unconventional treatments. "I've been watching you," she admitted tearfully. "I was so afraid to disrupt your life. But hearing your prayer today, I couldn't stay hidden." Hours passed as they talked, their conversation leading them to a lighthouse on the coast. As they walked beneath its towering structure, Darren felt gratitude and a tentative hope for the future. He still had questions, but for now, he was simply thankful to have his mother back. "As Maggie, the yoga master who helped me, his name is Tenzin," Carolyn continued, her voice filled with gratitude. "He became my guide in more ways than one. He introduced me to ancient healing practices and meditation techniques I had never encountered before. It was like waking up to an entirely new way of understanding my body and my illness." Darren listened intently, fascinated by his mother's story of unconventional recovery. She spoke of herbal remedies passed down through generations, grueling physical challenges that pushed her body to its limits, and moments of profound spiritual connection that defied explanation. "There were days I thought I wouldn't make it," she admitted, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "The cancer treatments were brutal, even with a gentler approach. There were nights I lay awake, racked with pain and doubt, wondering if leaving everything behind had been a terrible mistake." Darren gently squeezed her hand, offering silent support as she continued. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. The tumor started shrinking, my energy returned, and then, one day, after months of uncertainty, Tenzin looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "Maggie, I believe you've done it. You've beaten this." As they strolled along the shoreline, their feet sinking into the soft sand, Carolyn described her gradual transformation, not just physically as her body healed but also mentally and spiritually. "I learned to let go of so much anger and resentment I'd been carrying," she explained. "Anger toward your father, toward what our family had become. I found a peace I never thought possible." Darren nodded, understanding the weight of that anger all too well. "But if you found such peace there, why did you come back?" he asked. Carolyn's expression turned wistful. "Because no matter how beautiful my new life was, there was always something missing. You, Darren. I missed you every single day." She went on to explain how she had made her way back to the States over the past year, settling in a small coastal town not far from where they now stood. "I've been teaching yoga and holistic wellness under a new identity," she shared. "It's a modest life, but it's fulfilling." As they rounded a bend in the coastline, the lighthouse now a distant silhouette behind them, Carolyn's tone grew serious. "But I've also been watching, Darren, observing from a distance. And what I've seen breaks my heart." Darren felt a lump in his throat, knowing what was coming. "You've seen how things are with Dad and my brothers," he said quietly. "We've missed you so much, Mom. Of course, you'll come home with us. We have so much to catch up on." Caroline's laugh was sharp and devoid of warmth. "Oh, Henry. Always trying to spin things to your advantage. I'm afraid home isn't what it used to be. I'm here to reclaim what's rightfully mine, my assets and the end of our marriage." The color drained from Henry's face as her words sank in. Micah and Jaden exchanged panicked glances, realizing their comfortable lives were about to crumble. Caroline turned to her sons, her tone deceptively light. "Now, boys, I understand you've been giving your brother quite a hard time, stealing his savings, refusing to contribute to your father's care, acting like spoiled children instead of grown men. That ends today." Jaden, always quick to go on the offensive, found his voice. "You can't just walk back in and start making demands," he sputtered. "We've built lives without you. We have families to support." "Interesting you should mention families," Caroline replied smoothly. "From what I've seen, the only one truly supporting this family is Darren, the son you've tried so hard to cast aside." Micah and Jaden turned their anger on Darren, accusing him of orchestrating the confrontation. But Caroline wasn't having it. Her voice cut through their protests like a knife. "Enough," she snapped. "You want to talk about cowardice? Let's discuss how you've stolen from Darren, belittled him, and taken advantage of his kindness at every turn." Her words hit like a hammer, Fellow diners abandoned any pretense of not listening, some openly recording the scene. The public setting ensured every hypocritical word was documented for all to see. Micah and Jaden's faces went from shock to anger, then finally to the painful realization of how much their lives were about to change. Caroline rose from her seat, her voice ringing out. For years, you've hidden behind the facade of grieving sons. You've used my supposed death as an excuse for greed and cruelty. That ends now. She turned to Micah, her gaze cold. The family restaurant, your father and I built it from nothing. You can keep it, but its profits will now fund Henry's medical care. No more lining your pockets while Darren shoulders the burden alone. Micah tried to protest, but Caroline silenced him with a look. It's not up for debate. Agree to these terms, or I'll take legal action to reclaim my share entirely. Next, she faced Jaden. As for you, I want every piece of jewelry you took from my collection returned. Those were meant to be shared equally among all my children, including Darren. But I don't have them anymore, Jaden stammered. I needed the money for another luxury car? A vacation you couldn't afford. Caroline cut in. No excuses. You'll make restitution, or you'll face the consequences. Finally, she turned to Henry. Her voice softened, but only slightly. Look at what you've become, Henry. Look at the sons you've raised. You encouraged their greed and selfishness and stood by while they tormented the only one who showed real character, Darren. Henry's wheelchair seemed to shrink under her words. I won't leave you without support, she continued. I know people who helped me recover from cancer. I'll put you in touch with them. But understand, our marriage is over. You'll need to learn to stand on your own, with your son's help, figuratively if not literally. The restaurant was silent as Caroline delivered her final judgment. Darren, who had stayed quiet, finally spoke. I think it's time we left. None of us has much appetite left. As they walked to the exit, Micah hissed desperately, You can't do this to us. We're your family. Caroline's reply was calm but firm. Family is more than blood, Micah. It's about love, respect, and support, qualities Darren has shown in abundance, and you have not. It's time you learned what family truly means. Outside, Darren felt a weight lift from his shoulders. As they drove away, he glanced at his mother. Do you think they'll change? Caroline sighed. Maybe. Real change takes effort. But they've been forced to face some hard truths tonight. That's a start. For the first time in years, Darren allowed himself to hope.